أهلا وسهلا. Hoş geldiniz.
Bienvenidos.
Selamat datang.
Welcome to Speaking Our Mind podcast, where health is more than healthcare.
Welcome to Speaking Our Minds podcast, where health is more than healthcare. This podcast is provided by the City of Nashua Division of Public Health and Community Services. I'm your host today, Savitri Horrigan. I'm the Behavioral Health Strategist with City of Nashua, and I'm here today with Evenor. Welcome, Evenor.
Thank you. I feel very welcomed in this space, so I appreciate y'all.
Bienvenido,
Wonderful.
bienvenido.
Gracias, gracias.
And we also have Iraida here today. Welcome, Iraida.
Good morning. How are you today, Savitri Evenor? Welcome.
Very good. I'm very excited about this topic today. So today we're going to be talking about the Choices program at Manchester PAL and how it aligns with trauma-informed communities. Evenor, would you please introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what you do in the Choices program?
Absolutely. So good morning to all the listeners and to everybody present here today. My name is Evenor Pineda. I am the Intervention Services Director for the Manchester Police Athletic League. I'm the co-creator of the Choices High-Risk Youth Mentoring Program, which we piloted 2.5 years ago, following several years of volunteering with the Manchester Police Athletic League, following an extensive stay at the New Hampshire State Prison for Men, where I served 15 years. And once I was released, I was connected to the Manchester PAL through a probation officer who's actually the current chief parole officer in the city of Nashua, Bill Duffy. He was a corrections officer for a long time. That's how I met him. He was a part of the security threat group at the prison. And he kind of set himself apart as far as his approach with dealing with the inmates and the gang-involved inmates. So he really earned our respect. He wasn't trying to turn us, you know what I mean, like to work against anybody else, but just establish relationships just to keep guys safe behind the walls. So basically, once I was paroled, you know, he had the opportunity to see me grow behind the walls. He ended up moving on, becoming a corrections officer, but in many cases, the corrections officers the parole officers work overtime in the prison just because of the shortage of staff. So he got to see kind of like these, you know, where I was and how far I'd grown. And it started planting those seeds of like, hey, you know, when you get out, what do you plan on doing? You know, do you have any interest in giving back to the community? And I'm like, absolutely. I mean, I'm already doing that on the inside. I started volunteering on the inside. You know, I was a part-time barber. I was a peer supporter. I was on the hospice team. I was the chair and co-chair of the Inmate Communications Committee, which we later changed the name to Resident Communications Committee. So again, he saw my growth.
That's amazing. That's a lot of like wonderful work that you're doing.
Thank you. And yeah, so once I was released, you know, we reconnected, and he wasn't in Nashua yet, but you know, he did reach out. We connected, and he made the introduction to the then Operations and Development Director at Manchester PAL, Jana Stevens, and she was piloting a program called Futures. So that was a skill and mentoring program or group that met weekly every Wednesday for an hour and 15 minutes. And it was experiential learning, speakers with lived experience. So that's how I got my break at that time, and, you know, made several guest speaking appearances. And then I was extended to open invites, and it just became like a no-brainer for me. Every Wednesday was showing up, hanging out with the kids. That morphed into a co-facilitator role. Later, they actually offered me a part-time position. And at first I was kind of like, I didn't want to muddy the waters and you know, accept money for something I wanted to volunteer to do. But they're like, well, we have this money and we're going to lose it if we don't use it. So, and we want to honor your time, and you've already shown us that, you know, you're committed. So I reluctantly accepted getting paid. That led to basically in the state level, what happened was there was this juvenile probation transformation. So what that did was a valid attempt by the state to further divert kids from the system. However, there was no backup plan of like, what does that look like? So, okay, you're diverting kids from the system. So where does the onus lay on? Who's responsible for helping these young people? They're not going to be at the Sununu Youth Services Center.
Right.
So basically we had to step up, and we felt the impact immediately. So the juvenile court diversion program historically was a first time nonviolent offenders who would participate in the program. After following the transformation, now we had repeat offenders, we had violent offenders, and there was an incident that took place in Central High School in which a dozen kids from rival gangs got into this huge brawl in the middle of the school. And so we had a dozen kids refer to us all at once, and we weren't equipped for that, but we felt like we had to do something. And what we did was we made space in the group. We immediately referred the kids to the group versus waiting for the diversion panels, because diversion panels are once a month. And the way it fell, it would have been like another 3 or 4 weeks before these kids would have even been in front of a panel. Exactly. Yeah. And our fear was that this could escalate. And so what we did is we contacted all the parents. We had all the parents come in. We did this like mass orientation. We had this kind of show of force. The officer that's assigned to PALs typically aren't in uniform, but was like, hey, wear the uniform today. And we had the juvenile probation officer, one of the juvenile probation officers show up. Again, just kind of a show of force. And then I also recruited one of my friends who also had recently been paroled, kind of cut from the same cloth, same background, someone I trusted and knew would make a huge impact with these young people. And we saw success right away because we had these, 12 kids sitting in our group, and they weren't fighting. They weren't at each other.
Right. And they were the ones that had been fighting each other. Yeah. I was going to ask, like, what was that like to navigate a group dynamic like that?
Challenging.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a little scary. It's but at the same time, it's not unfamiliar. It's not uncharted waters. I lived that, and in my childhood, and I grew up in Nashua, which again, I love to say this because there's a misnomer when it comes to New Hampshire that they're like, New Hampshire is this super white state, it's low crime rate. Yeah, I mean, yes, the majority of the population is white. Yes, we do have a low crime rate. However, there is the tree streets. I mean, there's the other side of the tracks, and, not to further the stigma when it comes to the tree streets, but historically that's the low income families, single parent homes, large minority population. And, and I grew up in that, so, born and raised in Nashua, in the 80s, there was maybe a few dozen, Latino families. Not what it looks like today. You know what I mean? Yeah. It's very diverse. You feel more welcomed. You feel more part of the community. But back then, especially for me, where I feel like, I forget the terminology, is like white passing or something like that, right? So I felt like, I'm light skinned, so I can pass. And
that's how I feel. Like people have treated me that way too. Yeah.
Yeah. You know what I mean? But at the same time, I remember 9 years old being called for the first time, and not
awful.
Even understanding what that meant.
Yeah.
I wanted to pause there for a minute, and because I am a Nashua resident as well, I'm a woman, I also have experienced similar, senses, and I work with low income families as well, and I work with single moms and moms that have boys that are similar ages that you were experimenting similar situations that you were saying, that live in that particular neighborhood. And I'm not just trying to focus on that neighborhood. I'm now trying to, talk about families that are experiencing similar situations in general, because we know a lot about Nashua because we live here, but now we're trying to expand it to maybe other neighborhoods, because this podcast can be listened in other areas that might be experiencing similar situations. I wanted to ask you, how was your experience as a 9-year-old boy growing in that particular circumstances, and maybe not having the resources available to expand your opportunities as a brown boy, and not recognizing that the system was built that way, so you were just having less opportunities to take advantage of maybe the resources that maybe boys from other nationalities or white boys could have?
That's a great question. So I feel like my experience may differ just a little bit from others that grew up around the same time, just because of where I was living at the time. So I was on the north side of the river. So I was on Auburn Street. I went to Amherst Street School, where again, I didn't feel like I stuck out, but I did stick out. I mean, I remember my mother telling about, going to kindergarten. She's like, you didn't speak any English, and they didn't know what to do with you because we didn't have an ESL program back then. Wow. I think I may have been one of the first ESL, classes at Amherst Street School. Mm-hmm. But to your point, where, it was, even at 9 years old, there was this identity crisis. I don't know how I fit in, but I grew up in a diverse family. My I didn't grow up with my biological father, so it was my first stepfather. My first stepfather was African American. His family was actually the first Black family in Nashua that moved to Nashua. That he was the first African American to graduate from Nashua High School when it was still on Spring Street.
Wow.
So I learned a lot from him, because he was very well educated, college educated, stuff like that. But at the same time, he, at the time we didn't recognize it, but he suffered from, mental illness. And because of that, our home life was very tumultuous. It was like walking on eggshells. I don't know who would show up that day. You know what I mean? The happy-go-lucky, let's chum it up, or the strict by the book, you didn't make your bed right or whatever, you know what I'm saying? And then the belts, you know what I mean? And just the answer to everything, the consequence was always the belt. So it was very tricky because, again, I felt like I had unfair expectations of me at school. And I need to plug this in, is that I lost my Spanish because my step pops, first my mother is like, you guys don't speak any English. You need to learn English. That is the land, the language of the land. That's how you're going to advance. So that's cool. But at the same time, like, we were barred from speaking Spanish.
How did you feel about losing your maternal language? Was that something shocking to you as a boy, as a teenager growing?
Absolutely. It added to that, I exasperated the identity crisis because I'm Latino and I feel like more Colombian than American because of my mom and my family. Like, I don't know anything about my Nicaraguan heritage, you know what I'm saying? From my father, but my Colombian side, my mom and her sisters, my aunts and my cousins, they're all still, the majority of them are in Colombia. I only have, one of my tias lives up here. And she just came up a couple of years after 16, 17 years of that process with the visa.
Right.
But yeah, it just added to that where I'm just like, okay, not only are you a brown kid, but like you don't speak Spanish. So it's in our community, I think we're our own worst enemies sometimes. And it's cultural and historical. But, definitely there's this like, oh, you're not even really Spanish because you don't speak Spanish.
And definitely you will say, and I want to emphasize this so bad because it's important for me, building a case here is important to me. And I don't know your opinion. I want to know your opinion. It's important to me as we grew up, as we raise our kids to emphasize in our roots, in our own people, our own personas, and where do we come from. So if we lose culture, if we lose language, if we lose the way we, the place we come from, and language is part of it, then, we're not necessarily building up on raising a person. So I want to know your experience, and you're telling me that definitely was something that really influenced in your life.
Oh yeah,
negatively.
Absolutely. And I would say more so when I became a teenager, because then I overcompensated for my lack of Spanish. And there was this point in my life where, again, like where race and where I fit in with everything, like, and this is going to sound funny, but I remember there was this show on PBS called Ghost Rider. And that was my first time seeing, they portrayed some gang members in New York, and they were all Latino, but they were all my complexion. You know what I mean? And they're using the N-word and they're using all this other stuff. And I'm just like, they're saying white boy and this and that. And it's just like, huh. You know what I mean? So I am different. You know what I'm saying? Like I do not fall into this category. And it empowered me in a sense. I mean, to try to grab hold of my roots. And again, it was further exacerbated because my mother was an orphan. You know what I mean? Like her and her sisters were all orphaned in Colombia. So we didn't have that connection to like a grandma, grandpa, none of that stuff. We don't know our history, our family history. So it's just a lot of guessing. And me, I was always into history, and more so like, I guess you could say I'm a Hispanophile, you know what I mean? Like where I looked at it from that lens of the Spanish experience coming to the Americas and the conquest and colonization, et cetera, et cetera. That's all I had. It was definitely like a rabbit hole that I explored.
I think it's really amazing, like everything that you just shared. It resonates with me a lot too, with when it comes to like growing up, passing light-skinned, white passing, Asian American. I knew more Indonesian when I was younger, but I had some family members that didn't want us to speak it or anything. So kind of similar. But the thing that I wanted to point out was that you mentioned the seeing yourself represented, that media representation for Ghost Rider. And I totally feel you in that, like seeing yourself represented means so much. And also when that limited representation is kind of a negative stereotype. Yeah. And I think bringing it back to like what your work is at Manchester PAL, how incredible it is that you are living positive representation for these kids. Like that's huge. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I feel like that's what makes the work that much more meaningful to me and purposeful, not only for myself, but to my community. When I say my community, like, I mean, there's an intersection of so many communities, right? The first generation American, being Latino, being a male, heterosexual, the prole, all these things.
Coming back to the Choices program, which I understand stands for Creating Hope, Opportunities, Inspiring Change, Excellence, and Success. I love that title. It reminds me a lot of the HOPE framework, healthy outcomes for positive experiences for children, which is addressing that adverse childhood experiences. Can you tell me a little bit more about what that program looks like and how people can get more involved in that?
And I'm glad you brought that up, because how we came up with the name originally was being able to recognize that the young people we're working with are autonomous, they're super independent or seeking more independence. We want to honor that. And just, it's the whole cliche of you can bring a horse to water, but you can't force him to drink. It's the same thing with these young people. And we want to recognize that we're not trying to duplicate or replicate anything any of the other adults in their life are doing. We're just peers, right? We're not trying to be big bro. We're not trying to be pops. We're not, like, we're a peer. We're your equal. However, we're older and we've been through the mud. And so it's shining a light on the different pathways and why you have choices. You have choices. This is your choice, whatever you decide to do going forward. So as far as services, what the program looks like is basically we have multiple referral sources. Primarily, it's the juvenile court diversion program. It's juvenile probation. It's the juvenile courts. It's the school resource officers, and in-house. We'll have families that just are struggling and they'll come and they're just desperate for help. I'm not surprised. You know what I mean? Like, it doesn't cease to amaze me how much families are looking for resources and for connections. And honestly, even law enforcement, like I always frame it this way, that we are the equivalent to controlled fire, fighting wildfires. So the mentors with lived experience, credible messengers, we're the controlled fire, and the young people, they're the wildfire. And where, in this case, police are asking for our help. They're like, hey, doesn't even matter, right? Because, I think of this one individual, he's Dominican and Italian, grew up in Chelsea, Mass. But he's like, I grew up in the hood and, gang infested neighborhoods. He's like, but I can't connect with kids the way you do because of this badge just swinging from my neck. You know what I mean? And there's so much truth to that. So it doesn't matter, it's what they see and how you present and why it's so important, the work that we do and the approach and being authentic. So getting back to the services. So, I always talk about the 4 pillars. So how we deliver our services. So there's the education piece. So education originally was the non-traditional sense, in which we're just really challenging the false conceptions or perceptions, challenging the false perceptions these young people have when it comes to the streets, when it comes to violence, when it comes to gangs, drugs, etc. It's really turning it on its head, because unfortunately nowadays with social media, all these things are like romanticized, what I mean? Glamorized. And we want to, really, really paint a vivid picture for them of how ugly and nasty and full of pain this world is if you choose to go down that path. Over time, it's morphed into identifying that the education gaps, right? There's these kids that are getting pushed along in the middle schools. When they get to high school, then, you're in this huge school and now you get lost in the sauce.
Right.
And they think I'm just going to get pushed along. No one's giving you a credit. You have to earn that credit. And having those real world conversations with them. So that's why it's so important for us to have a partnership with the Manchester School District, which has allowed us to have access to our kids and other kids in the schools. And I'll speak a little bit more about that in a moment. And then there's in addition to the education piece, it's the mentorship, right? So the mentorship, and what sets us apart from other mentorship type programs, is that we utilize credible messengers like myself, people with lived experience, and I can speak at length of it. My involvement as a teenager in the juvenile court, I was at YDC before it became the Sununu Center. I was in YDSU, which no longer exists, was absorbed by the Sununu Center. I was 17 years old in county jail, because at the time in New Hampshire, 17 years old, you weren't adults.
Wow.
So again, we can speak at length to those, and that's just myself, right? And then the other mentors too, they have, maybe different angles that they can play, but it's not too far, difference, and just makes us more relatable. It's nice to have diversity on our team, because we're going to connect differently with everybody.
Right.
And that's
who understand too. And like, honestly, the thing about the 17 years old that shocks me because of all this science and data out there that shows that our, frontal lobes are not fully formed or developed until our mid-20s or even later.
Yeah.
And so I just, my heart goes out to those young people that are experiencing that.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. No. And it's sad. And not much has changed other than it's 18 now, you know what I mean? And there's still kids, right. 18-year-olds, you're a baby, you know what I mean? And you're in a county jail with a bunch of grown men who, honestly, they're really just a lot of big kids. That's what it comes down to. And in my experience, it was like kind of like a reunion. Every time I went, I graduated from one, facility to another or upped it up, you know what I mean? So going from the juvenile system into the adult system, from county to state prison, it was the same guys I would see almost throughout. And it was mind boggling to me. But at the same time, like, I'm smart enough to understand, like, there's a reason for that. You know what I mean? It's the system. It's this cycle that we get caught up in. And where different guys but then you look back and you reflect and you're like, well, why didn't so-and-so, like he went to juvie, but he never went to county, never, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Something, he caught it, early, or
maybe there was a support or
exactly
some kind of resource.
Exactly. So that's the mentorship piece, and there's mediation. So mediation is something that we take great pride in, that we're able to coach these young people in real time on many occasions to deal with the different situations that they're dealing with. Because again, so a lot of them have different backgrounds. Some of them are already court involved, so they may have a probation officer. So we can coach them up in how to engage with their probation officer in a meaningful way, in a productive way. Also, if they're at SYSC, because we also have access to the kids at SYSC, we'll visit them and they're having difficulties with the staff. So again, we get to coach them up in how to approach and to engage with the staff there so that they don't extend their stay, unfortunately, from their actions. But it can be as simple as a parent, you know what I mean? Like how to talk to your parents. And unfortunately, in many cases, these young people have to be the adult. They have to take the higher road. So again, we're trying to coach them up and to coach these young people up in real time to make the best of their situations and with their peers. How do you interact with your peers? That's very important, or it's, school staff, teachers, etc. So in the police, if you're on the street, why is it a bad idea to wear a shiesty when you're walking down Elm Street? Because it doesn't look good. You know what I'm saying? Covering your face. You look like a bank robber, but that's the style now. You know what I mean? To each their own. And I'm not trying to pass judgment, but also make them understand, like, help them grow that skill and empathy to be able to put themselves in the shoes of law enforcement or their parents or teachers, so they can look at it differently, because they're just looking at it from a first person lens, and we got to get them out of that, because unfortunately this world has become really self-centered and everything revolves around us and we're not thinking about others. So again, those little skills that we're trying to help them in real time so that they can be productive and they can kind of get out of their own way. In addition to the last pillar is community connection. So as a program, we pride ourselves in being a resource to the community, but at the same time building meaningful connections with community resources and also vetting them. Because again, this is something that was kind of shocking to me at first, was that a lot of these organizations in the community, some of them, like, they're not really doing the work. It's smoke and mirrors, and unfortunately, because of that, these kids are suffering. These families are suffering. They're thinking like, oh yeah, I was referred to this program or this organization, and they go and it's lip service, it's nothing meaningful. There's no real
the support that they need. Yeah.
And so we try our best to vet our community partners to ensure that we're connecting them with the right people that truly care. And sometimes we have to, find out, and so what we do is we're going to walk alongside them through the process to ensure that they're getting the services that they need. And honestly, there's just a lot of stigma too around a lot of these things. Like, again, when it comes to, we're talking about mental health, especially young people, like, I don't want to talk to a stranger, we're talking about like counseling or therapy and things like that. And I'm like, hey, I felt the same way, so it allows me an opportunity to share my firsthand experience. I'm saying, like, I had a therapist and it was really good, and you have to understand that they're not going to solve your problems. They're just going to ask the right questions. They're trained professionals to pull the answers from you because you have them.
Yes.
They're locked up inside. You know what I mean? So it's just asking the right questions, but you have to allow yourself to be in that space. And, something I learned is that you have to kind of treat it like dating. You know what I mean? When it comes to therapy. So you're not going to click. I was
just saying this with my friends the other day. Yeah.
You know what I mean? So
exactly.
It's the truth. So just because you don't connect with this person doesn't mean you're just like, oh, I'm done. I'll never go to therapy again. Like, nah, man, keep trying.
Because there's different kinds too. And there's like, there's so many different things that we can look for in a therapist that, I think it's awesome that you're like positive role model for them to say like, hey, this is like something I do and it helps me and it could help you too. Thank you so much, Evenor. I appreciate you coming on today and talking about all this. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. No, thank you for the opportunity. And
if we want to continue conversations with you, if someone that is listening this podcast episode wants to connect with your organization, what do they need to do? How to connect with you? Where to find more information? Sometimes the desperation is so big, they really don't have any other place. We always talk and say, always call 211 is the number one resource we share. Or if someone is really in desperation and they are considering suicide, 988 is the right number. But if they want to touch base directly with you and your organization, where do they call or how do they find more information?
well, I would just say, reach out to me directly. My phone number is 603-670-6815. Also email. This is a very lengthy email, but it's Pineda, EPINEDA at manchesterpoliceathleticleague.org.
And anybody can call us at the Public Health Department, Savitri Horrigan, Iraida Munoz. We are available to help you out connecting you with resources. Our direct line 603-589-4500, and we're happy to connect resources to any families that are interested in connecting with you. Well, thank you so much for being with us here.
Thank you.
Thank you, Evenor.
Thank you both.
أهلا وسهلا. Hoş geldiniz.
Bienvenidos.
Selamat datang.
Welcome to Speaking Our Mind podcast, where health is more than healthcare.